I don't have to tell anybody in this room that the last decade in this business has been one hard decade. And it certainly had an effect on communities your size, communities that are larger, communities that are smaller. And so I felt it was kind of appropriate to talk about some of the structural changes that have taken place in the airline industry over the last decade and what it means for air service development on a going forward basis. I'm going to stand here today and say this industry is getting healthier. I think we've heard enough of the bad news over the last decade, and while some of the news is still not great, and the industry is still quite fragile, I do believe that times are better as on a going forward basis based on all of the very hard work that's been done over the last decade. Staggering as it is, capacity has been rebalanced with the U.S. economy, and today we have the fewest number of domestic available seat miles per $1,000 of GDP since 1979. Think about that. It's almost like we took 33 years of growth on economic growth and just said we can't sustain that. And we've had to adjust our business back to where it is that we were when we began this process. In 2008, the industry lost 17 cents on every dollar that they earned. In 2011, the industry is actually going to make about a penny for every dollar they make. It's really a dramatic turnaround, and just to put in perspective, just how what it's taken, the gut-wrenching changes because of this thing called oil, but we have an industry that's finding a way to make modest profits in a very weak economy at very high oil. The airline industry has covered its cost of capital, I believe, once in the last 30 years. This business shouldn't be around, but it certainly has done a great job of destroying investor wealth over the last 30 years, to be sure. Consolidation. There has been a lot of consolidation. I think there is more to come. I think the consolidation is not so much going to come at the mainline level. I think that there is still more consolidation to be done at the regional level, especially as these airplanes come off lease and as contracts are renegotiated. There are going to be some haves and have-nots that are established within the regional space, and quite honestly, we already have them. And you can see one name up here, SkyWest, that has a really terrific balance sheet and promises to be one of the regional providers of tomorrow. Now, whether it's Pinnacle, whether it's Republic, whether it's American Eagle when it spins itself out, I don't know who the others are going to be, but there is not room in the regional sector for 8 providers of lift going forward, so certainly expect to see that there will be more consolidation in that space. The reality is 40% of the airports equal 97% of domestic demand. So I don't have to do the other math. 60% of the airports have 3% of the demand. What does an airport system need to look like tomorrow? If the industry is consolidating, shouldn't the infrastructure consolidate? It's a hard question. But the fact of the matter is, it's hard to make a case that the federal government, state governments can afford to support all of the airports when maybe we need to begin thinking a little bit more from a regional perspective. It's something to think about, not asking you to act on it today, but it is something to be thinking about because air service, the market is already at work in consolidating these airports around certain regions. And we think about some of the events that are taking place out there in the industry. There are a lot of catalysts that are driving some of this. And it begins with in-the-wing oil in excess of $100 a barrel. Right now, there is no 50-seat or less replacement airplane on the drawing board at any manufacturer. So think about the number of markets that are dependent on a 50-seat and less airplane, and there is no replacement. And as these regional jets begin to get to 10 years old, the maintenance demand on that airplane is significant. And are people going to want, are the owners going to want to address those maintenance issues at a 10-year cycle? It's a real question mark. The conundrum. And I can take this and I could draw this map anywhere, but mostly in the middle of the country. And so I just drew rings around Louisville, Lexington, and Cincinnati, and how many airports are enveloped within that 120-mile radius. And this does not include many, many small airports. But this is really the conundrum where it is, if I'm a small airport, am I better off taking to the highway to take advantage of the choices that are offered by these larger markets? When I look at Fort Wayne, you kind of have a neat geographic advantage, if you will, in that your big choices, Dayton and Indianapolis, the two largest markets within your catchment area, are at that end of that 2-hour drive. That's kind of a max, right, as we think about it. And so you kind of have this unique geographic position, if you will, but nonetheless, geography is a fragile thing as well in the event that, you know, a lower fare service landed somewhere else that was going to have a meaningful impact on the service that you have in place today. When you take a look at the catchment area over the last decade, and that's kind of what we've been doing today, is just talking about the last decade, Toledo has lost 72% of its domestic origin and destination traffic. Lansing 65, South Bend 30, Indianapolis down a modest 4, Dayton up 3, U down 24.9 or 25%. So while it is certainly less than ideal. This performance relative to others within the catchment area does speak to some of the strength of the core economy here, at least from my read, and the fact that as GM continues to invest here, I would expect the numbers to improve, because that just means that more and more vendors need to find their way to Fort Wayne. I told you we were going to talk about Southwest. And this poor little Texas carrier that just doesn't go anywhere and just kind of serves all of 69 points, and now it's 72. So I decided I would just draw a 90-mile circle around all 72 points on the map. Southwest, in its own direct or indirect way, affects domestic origin and destination traffic 97% of domestic origin and destination traffic. It's just absolutely numbing. And once they take over AirTran, that number is only going to get bigger. But what it is that everyone likes to think about Southwest is that low-fare darling, right? Well, Southwest is not the low-fare guy all the time anymore. And what's interesting is over the last decade, 49 of Southwest airports saw fare increases. 49 of 69 airports. And what's also pretty interesting is there were some airports that saw real fare increases, and where it is the increase was greater than 27%. So quite significant. When you think about Southwest and the low-cost carriers. But this is also a piece of the good news, if you will, because even Southwest has to raise fares to make money. The industry has to raise fares to make money and be sustainable. While it is that we got really used to being able to take off and have dinner on Saturday night for 39 bucks. You know, those days are just need to be a memory, and the fact that, you know, air service is going to get more expensive on a going forward basis. And it's not just the legacy carriers that need to raise their fares, but also the low-cost carriers that need to do the same. The number of airports where traffic was less in 2010 than 2000. And yeah, you appear on this map, but you and 146 of your closest friends, I think, also saw significant declines in traffic between 2000 and 2010. And if you think about what's taken place over that time, it's just all the capacity cuts, right? I mean, it's just a natural thing that's going to happen as the industry gets smaller. Air traffic is going to suffer. And just a few airports have seen more traffic in 2010, and largely those have to do with a low-cost carrier or Allegiant entering their market. And in many cases, Allegiant is the only reason why it is that they're on this map. And Allegiant needs to be a complementary service. Allegiant is not the answer for everything. You got to be really happy you have them. They do their work very well. But Allegiant doesn't connect you to the global airline map. It gets you to Las Vegas or it gets you to Orlando, and it addresses your leisure function. What's absolutely critical is to maintain connectivity to those that offer you a global network, because now, I mean, you're home to a company that is absolutely a global company and just announced that it's going to make itself more of a global company last week. And so it's critical to maintain connectivity to a global network. So airlines trying to make themselves sustainable are not a friend of the airport per se. You know, cutting capacity is not something that, you know, any airport wants to have happen. And consolidation certainly is having a second order effect, because that's going to cause a readjustment of capacity by the merged carrier at any number of markets. I think airline winners and losers are already being identified. And we can kind of take a look at various sectors out there. But the question is, the airport winners and losers, I don't know that we know yet. I think the market is at work. And there are some that are on their way out, but I don't think that we're able to identify exactly who they are. We have a pretty good hunch on some, but not all. I think the days of wholesale capacity cutting are basically behind us, and that's good. And I think one of the most important points I'm going to make here is seasonal capacity adjustments are likely to be a bigger part of the vernacular. And so I think we're going to see a lot more service out there on seasonal patterns versus exiting the market wholly. And this is going to be something that I think is good for communities. Yeah, you'd like to have it year-round, but Allegiant is a company that was largely built on a seasonality pattern. And I think Allegiant's actually teaching the rest of the industry some lessons as to how to serve some markets in the domestic space. The economy is not going to perform any magic, I think, in the immediate term. And let's not forget, it took 30 plus years. It took 33 years to create this mess. It's going to take us a little while longer to kind of understand, are we one of the winners of tomorrow? Do we have a system that is sustainable? And I really do believe that in the next, by the end of this decade, we're going to really understand what the air transportation system looks like on a going forward basis, where today there are just more questions than I have the ability to answer for you. So based on that, those are my formal remarks. I would be happy to take any and all questions.
Does it make sense for us as a community to subsidize an airline at our airport for to Washington and New York? In your opinion?
In my opinion, I am not the biggest fan of subsidies, but if done in the right way, and I think that there are some good revenue guarantee models that are out there, if done correctly, I think you can look at some opportunities if they were to present themselves. And I do believe that communities like Fort Wayne are going to be presented with those types of opportunities, because what do I do with this jet? Are you willing to work with me? I'll do this flying. So I believe that there are going to be a number of approaches to smaller communities out there as these airplanes come off lease. And I would never say no, but I also, you have to appreciate, you cannot buy a market. And it's really a fine line, because if you think you can buy a market, as soon as that subsidy runs out, the air service is gone. But if there's a way, to kind of get in there and build a market, do some revenue guarantees, that kind of thing, yeah, I think you have to take a look at those opportunities as they present themselves.
What does it cost American Eagle to fly from here to Dallas? How much money does that airline lose on those flights?
I don't think it really loses much. I mean, obviously, otherwise they wouldn't have added capacity, and so, but typically you can look at a regional service as costing around $2,500 an hour. Okay, so if it's 2.5 hours, costs them, $5,000, $5,500, and then the question is, but that's without fuel. Okay, I really need to stipulate that, right? I mean, that's without fuel, because the American bears the fuel risk for American Eagle. The $5,500 buys you an airplane and buys you crew to fly the airplane, and other things as well, and you ground handling, but it doesn't buy your fuel.
Wayne, how does that make us unique in the grand scheme of airports in the region and across the country?
If I were to have spent a little more time with a couple of those maps, you would see that some of the base cities have really done remarkably well with all the deployment and that kind of thing. So I would say that they have had an absolutely positive impact. You look into the Carolinas and Texas, there are some names that pop up as being stronger today than they were in the past. That kind of, you go, wow, really? And it's not just the low-cost carrier, and not just Allegiant and all of them. The base cities have made a big difference. I'm assuming it's a positive impact here.
What is the role of the corporate community towards these initiatives?
I don't think the role of the corporate community has ever been more important than it is today. And simply because airlines are looking at the world so much different as a profit and loss business. And if I'm going to run a profitable operation, I absolutely need the business community supporting what it is I do, and working with the airline to use that product. And so I don't know that we've ever been in a more important time to, when you're out on your trips, taking along a different group of folk than you might have in the past, because the idea that on the margin this service is good, those days are gone, and now I think it just requires a true community commitment versus on the margin this is good.